White plays pawn to d4. Black plays pawn to d5. White plays pawn to c4. Black plays pawn to e6. White plays knight to f3. Black plays knight to d7. White plays knight to c3. Black plays knight to f6. White plays queen to c2. Black plays pawn to c4. White plays pawn to e4. Black plays knight to b6. White plays pawn to 4. Black plays pawn to a5. White plays bishop to e2. Black plays bishop to b4. White plays king to g1. Black plays king to g8. White plays bishop to e3. Black plays bishop to d7. White plays knight to e5. Black plays queen to e8. White plays knight to c4. Black plays knight to c4. White plays bishop to c4. Black plays pawn to e5. White plays pawn to f3. Black plays pawn to d4. White plays bishop to d4. Black plays bishop to e6. White plays bishop to d3. Black plays rook to d8. White plays bishop to f6. Black plays pawn to f6. White plays pawn to f4. Black plays queen to c6. White plays pawn to e5. Black plays pawn to e5. White plays bishop to h7. Black plays king to h8. White plays bishop to f5. Black plays rook to g8. White plays bishop to e6. Black plays queen to e6. White plays rook to e1. Black plays queen to g6. White plays queen to g6. Black plays rook to g6. White plays rook to e5. Black plays bishop to c3. White plays pawn to c3. Black plays rook to d2. White plays pawn to g3. Black plays rook to h6. White plays pawn to h4. Black plays rook to c6. White plays rook to a5. Black plays rook to c3. White plays rook to h5. Black plays king to g7. White plays rook to g5. Black plays king to h7. White plays rook to f2. Black plays rook to d3. White plays king to g2. Black plays pawn to f6. White plays rook to g4. Black plays rook to c4. White plays rook to e2. Black plays rook to d7. White plays rook to e6. Black plays rook to d2. White plays king to f3. Black plays rook to d3. White plays king to e2. Black plays rook to a3. White plays rook to e7. Black plays king to h8. White plays rook to e8. Black plays king to h7. White plays rook to e7. Black plays king to h8.